Today's lesson focuses on the cosine ratio. As with the sine ratio, the cosine ratio is used when we have particular information. The cosine ratio is used when we have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. So if we were going to use the cosine ratio for angle A, these are the two things that are in our formula, and we would go ahead and use the cosine ratio. So as with the sine, this is going to look very, very similar to what we did last video. The only difference is instead of opposite and hypotenuse, we have adjacent and a hypotenuse. So let's look at making sure we understand adjacent, because hypotenuse is really straightforward. So in our first cosine ratio, if we wanted to know the cosine of angle A, well, the cosine of angle A is equal to the adjacent side, which is that side right there, over the hypotenuse. And if we wanted to figure out the cosine of angle B, well, the cosine of angle B is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and we know the hypotenuse is 13, and the adjacent side to angle B is 12 degrees. So just as with the sine ratio, it's very important to understand the word adjacent. Adjacent means next to, adjacent means touching. Given that we can do that, then we can go ahead and solve triangle problems like we did last day. So just as last day, we started off with let's find an angle, because it turns out to be the easiest one to do, because we're just going to push a button on our calculator. So if this is angle A, if that's angle A, well, again, our hypotenuse is up here, and the adjacent side is right here. And according to our ratio, that would be 4, and that would be 5. Now, I want to remind you that when you are trying to find an angle, it's just a matter of pushing that button on our calculator. But today, as we're looking at the cosine ratio, well, we're going to press the second cos button. So again, on our calculator right here, here's where we're looking. We're looking right here where my arrow is. There's the cosine button, and there's the little blue cos to the -1. And again, what that button will do, it will literally tell us the answer. And we just have to know to push it and what to do. So again, to know how to push it, we're going to go second cos. And when we press second cos, that's what pops up. And then we're going to go ahead on our calculator and punch in the ratio that is right here, just as we did with the sine. And when we hit enter or equals, our calculator is going to spit out the angle, and in this case it's 37 degrees. So let me show you that. Second cos, and it shows cos -1. Now what my calculator knows is you're going to give it some numbers, and it's going to answer your question, and the answer is an angle. And there it is right there, 36.86. We'll round angles to a nice number, 37 degrees. So there's one of the equations we need to be able to solve, and it doesn't matter what ratio it is, we need to be able to solve it. So here's another example. I'll do example number 4 first, because again, it looks just like we did. And I just want to remind you of those things we want to do. We want to write, like, what do I know? So what do I know or want to know? Well, I want to know the angle theta. You could call it angle A if you want. It really doesn't matter. And again, I know that's the hypotenuse, so I know the hypotenuse. And relative to this angle, I know that side right there, and that is the adjacent side. So again, it's all obvious today. We're doing cosine today, so the answer is always going to be cosine. But after we learn the tangent ratio and we prepare for our test, just like your test, I'm going to mix it all up. So it's really important you get in the good habit of writing down what I know. Given I know I have the cosine ratio, now I'm just going to substitute in, well, the cosine of my angle, that's my theta, is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So just as we did before, we're going to substitute in. Now, in this example right here, just a reminder, when we're finding an angle, that's when we simply push buttons. So what we're going to go ahead and do is go second cos, and it's going to punch out that, and we're going to put in our ratio, and we're going to hit enter. And when we hit enter, let's go ahead and do it. Second cos 2.1 divided by 4.2, 60 degrees. Calculator tells us the answer is 60 degrees. We also have to be able to find sides. So again, in looking at this, remember that Pythagoras can't be used because we only have one side. But if I call that angle A, well, there are two equations we have to solve. The equation with the x on top and the equation with the x on the bottom, like we looked at with the sine ratio and our homework for sine. Well, here's this one right here, and we won't know what it is the x on the top or is the x on the bottom until we write down what I know. Well, what do I know? I know angle A. Again, there's the hypotenuse. It's across from the 90 degree. I know the hypotenuse, and this side right here is adjacent. It's adjacent to the angle. And again, no surprise today, adjacent, hypotenuse, those are the words in our cosine formula. So we're going to go ahead and substitute. The cosine of 70 degrees is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So again, what we've simply done is we've substituted in. Now remember the next thing we did? Next thing we did is, well, the cosine of 70 is just a number on our calculator. So let's go ahead and press the cosine of 70, and then we'll just substitute in that number to make things a bit nicer. 0.3420. So the cosine of 70 is 0.3420. Remember a number in our calculator. And when we have the unknown on the bottom, this is when we interchange. This is the other type of equation we need to be able to solve. So as soon as we interchange, then we can go ahead and do our calculator. And when we do that on our calculator, we get 4.4. Now, you always want to ask yourself, does the answer make sense? So let's go back and look. And the answer is 4.4, and 4.4 is bigger than 1.5. And given that we're looking for the hypotenuse, I think we're probably right. So I didn't do one of the examples where the unknown's on the top, but we've done that already. You did that in, as I said, with the sine, and you did it with your homework, and you'll do it with your homework again today. So the key ideas today are almost the same as the key ideas from last day. Today, our key idea is I want us to understand when we use the cosine ratio, when we use the cosine formula. And that's when you have adjacent and hypotenuse. And the other thing is we have to know how to solve the three kinds of equations. And again, the three kinds of equations are, you have to find the angle, button on our calculator. You have to find the unknown on top of the fraction. That's when you multiply over. And the one we just did, you have to find the unknown on the bottom of the fraction, and that's when you interchange.